Venezuela extends the state of emergency for 30 more days to halt the spread of COVID-19. Health workers in Peru call on President Martín Vizcarra to declare state of catastrophe due to a hike in infections in the country's Amazon region. And India unveils a $270 billion stimulus package for workers and small businesses to help them cope with the economic impact of the pandemic.
But we can let our lives revolve.
Hello and welcome to Telesur. I'm Carla Gonzalez and this is From the South. In Venezuela, President Nicolás Maduro renewed the state of emergency decree for 30 more days to continue protecting the Venezuelan people and consolidate COVID-19 containment.
Aquí voy a firmar, así lo anuncio.
I am signing the renewal of the state of alarm. Today, May 12, for 30 more days. I am renewing the state of alarm decree for 30 more days to continue to protect our people. The decree will be effective beyond June. Approved, I have signed the letter for Dr. Juan José Mendoza, President of the Constitutional Chamber, to evaluate the relevance of the state of alarm.
A fifth flight carrying more than 46 tons of medical supplies from China arrived in Venezuela this Tuesday. The shipment arrived through the permanent air bridge established between both nations since the outbreak of the epidemic. The shipment contains about 80,000 PCR tests for the detection of the novel coronavirus, as well as about 4 million masks and gloves. The authorities announced that the medical supplies will be distributed across all health centers of the country immediately to reinforce the fight against the pandemic. President Nicolás Maduro said that with the OPEC Plus agreement and with the G20 oil prices beginning to stabilize, that the global economy is expected to stabilize.
Thanks to the OPEC Plus agreement, oil prices have started to stabilize, hovering at around $30 per barrel. Other large producers have said they will cut back production to help prices stabilize over the next few weeks, hopefully increasing to $40 or $45, which will be the basis for economic recovery.
This Tuesday, Venezuela's president stated that the price war was part of the destabilizing plans of the failing terrorist incursion known as Operation Gideon.
You don't realize that the brutal price war of the oligarchy came just a few days before the planned mercenary raid and the terrorist attack against Venezuela. We were aware of the plot thanks to our intelligence from the US and from Colombia, and also thanks to the cooperation of other intelligence agencies. We knew the plan called to sow discontent, because once the mercenaries were to arrive, they expected the people to be angry and to support the terrorists.
The contract to invade Venezuela with U.S. mercenaries reveals a military plan, but also a political project that seeks to overlap the Venezuelan constitution. Let's have a look.
This is a social housing project where its own residents participate in its design and construction. For 9 years now, they have been working towards building their own houses, but they're also militants of the Bolivarian Revolution. Under the contract of invasion signed by Juan Guaido and the U.S. company Silvercorp, these people would have been a military target of the mercenaries.
All the Venezuelan population, not only the members of the local production and supply committees club, but all of us are targets. Because when these people sign the contract, they say that any site that they may feel is a threat could become a target, allowing them to destroy it and even have a license to kill.
These women are spokespersons for food and basic services committees. They're also political leaders considered hostile by the invasion forces. Their crime, in the eyes of the signers of the contract, is to defend a political project that would be annulled.
We are aware that at the time of an invasion, the first ones to be attacked will be the popular power, the people, the communities, because we have defended the right for life. The Venezuelan people are peaceful, but we are also aware that we are not backing down.
They call for a political dispute within the framework of the Constitution.
There is a group of Venezuelans that are not happy with the revolution, and we can understand that. And they may have their own reasons. We respect that. But we have a constitution. We live in a democracy where they can vote for their candidates. They have that option if they want a way out of the revolution.
The best way to defend the revolution and to defend power is through elections. You want to participate, defend what you believe in, because we believe in popular power and in the political participation of the people.
The leaked document is a military manual to impose a political project in Venezuela.
This is an example that a plan goes beyond overthrowing a government or ending a country's political project. It is an expression of the United States foreign policy, where it's in control, not only of the natural resources, but also of the markets.
The Venezuelan constitution is one of the main victims in this contract. It creates public powers and foreign military commands which lead national forces.
These are elements in which the country and the state are subject to this instrument that has no part in the legal system. For example, the selling of oil companies. The Bolivarian National Armed Forces would also cease to be an organism subject to the President and the Minister of Defense and would be subject to a transnational force of action.
This document reveals how this sector of the opposition views Chavismo as a force to be eliminated without taking into account human lives.
Colombia's Navy commander has dismissed a number of officials and soldiers, blaming them for the disappearance of the 3 armed speedboats that reached Venezuelan territory.
Se decide retirar del servicio.
We've decided to dismiss the Lieutenant Colonel of Naval Infantry, the commander of the 51st Infantry Battalion, and the head of operations and maritime units. These decisions are taken after the grave damage done to our organization by recent events. Additionally, so as to determine responsibility and the appropriate punishment, depending on whether these were intentional acts. The investigation will continue. Our findings so far have established that the locations where the speedboats were anchored did not meet the necessary safety requirements. We've also discovered that the boats lost their anchors and were lost to the current, which shows they were not properly secured and safety regulations they were not observed.
In other news, doctors in Peru have demanded that the government of President Martín Vizcarra declare a state of catastrophe and request international medical aid to confront the COVID-19 pandemic. Doctors attending the local population in Iquitos, in Loreto, and other areas of the Peruvian Amazon have been infected with the coronavirus, reducing the number of health personnel able to continue providing care. The Peruvian health sector has issued an urgent call on the government to mobilize the necessary resources and address the health crisis in the rural areas of the country.
More than 50 hospitalized doctors in a serious condition who are in ICUs, those who have died, those who are in Lima. The hospital has no more than 13 to 15 doctors for the entire hospital. I think this situation has already overwhelmed all our human capacity. That's why today we demand the government declare the state of catastrophe and disaster in Loreto. President Vizcarra, please listen to the voice of the people of Loreto. Listen to the voice of the doctors. Declare Loreto in a state of disaster and catastrophe. At the time, we demand that our governor, Iván Ochoa, please at least do something good, that he requests international aid, that doctors come from other sister Latin American nations and worldwide to provide solidarity to Loreto. Today, the first to be hit in this firing line against COVID-19 have been the doctors.
In Argentina, President Alberto Fernández announced an extension to the mandatory quarantine until May 23rd. But in some parts of the country, certain restrictions will be lifted earlier under the supervision of state authorities.
President Alberto Fernández has said the main objective of preventive measures is to stop further infections, and also heavily criticized those who have asked that the quarantine be lifted for economic reasons.
We are aware that the quarantine is affecting the economy. We are not ignoring that fact, but I have to repeat that what matters most to us is to protect our people's health and to save lives.
In the capital, Buenos Aires, some restrictions for businesses are being lifted, and children will be allowed to leave their homes for a small period of time.
A partir del martes.
Starting Tuesday, bookshops, flower shops, toy stores, perfume shops, home appliances stores, and music stores will be allowed to reopen. From Thursday on, bike shops, car dealerships, real estate agencies, jewelry shops, and others will reopen too. But all of this is based on strict social distancing rules and hygienic rules. And on the weekends, children under the age of 16 will be allowed to exit their homes, but need to stay within 500 meters of their home and be accompanied by a parent.
This is the third stage of the mandatory preventive measures implemented by the government.
As a business owner, this has greatly affected me, but I think if we are all careful, everything will be okay.
I turn on the TV and I hear thousands of comments, and most are very uninformed. What we need to do is care for ourselves and to respect social distancing measures. We need to respect what President Fernandez says. I came out to the bank to check my account and money is running out. But health is the one thing we can't get back.
Industrial activities will also be restarted in Buenos Aires, although strict preventive protocols will need to be observed.
We have more stories coming up. Don't go away. Welcome back. Cuba has released video evidence of the terrorist attack on its embassy in Washington, D.C. that occurred on April 30th. Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez held a conference on Tuesday in which he recounted the details of this attack. He said the suspect, Alexander Alazo, approached the embassy and shouted offensive phrases. Alazo went on to throw a desecrated Cuban flag at the embassy railings before trying to set it on fire. Shortly after, he fired 32 shots at the embassy located a few blocks away from the White House with a semi-automatic rifle.
This is a terrorist action committed against our diplomatic mission in Washington that cannot be seen as a separate issue, but as a result of the aggressive policy and discourse of the government of the United States against Cuba, the hatred speech and the permanent instigation to violence by U.S. politicians and extremist groups, anti-Cuban extremist groups who have turned these sort of attacks into a way of life.
Foreign Minister Rodriguez confirmed that the shooter had visited the Cuban embassy 2 weeks prior to this attack.
It is known that Alazo Baró planned the attack with enough time beforehand that he visited the crime scene prior to the attack for exploratory purposes, and this happened around 2 weeks before the attack. At the moment of the attack, he declared himself as a follower of the current U.S. president. You already saw those signs desecrating the Cuban flag, and wrapped himself up with the flag of the U.S. He didn't put up any resistance when he was arrested, as you have just seen in the video images.
This Tuesday in Brazil, the health ministry reported hundreds of new deaths caused by COVID-19 for a total of 12,000 fatalities up to date. Our correspondent, André Vieira, has the details.
According to the Health Ministry of Brazil, 889 people died in the last 24 hours in the country. As of Tuesday night, Brazil has a total of 12,400 deaths from COVID-19 and more than 177,000 people infected. But according to various universities, the actual number of cases could be between 10 and 14 times higher than official numbers. In Rio de Janeiro, the second worst impacted state, there were 158 COVID-19 deaths in the last 24 hours. The city of Niterói and São Gonçalo have been declared under lockdown, but Rio de Janeiro, which is led by a Bolsonaro ally, has yet to do so. There is also a lack of beds in public and private hospitals. Meanwhile, the mayor of the city does maintain a restriction measures aimed to different non-essential services. Far-right President Bolsonaro announced yesterday a decree affirming that places such as hair salons and gyms are among essential services, which would allow them to restart operations. But governors are reaffirming restrictions imposed as the president looks for the ways to ease the social isolation and the lockdown in Brazil.
That was André Vieira from Brazil. And as the coronavirus crisis deepens in that country, the federal government and the Supreme Court are at odds over the protection of indigenous communities as agribusiness and mining interests continue to encroach into their lands.
The Supreme Court has determined that a strategy being used by the government of Jair Bolsonaro to encroach onto protected indigenous lands is non-valid. This dealt a significant blow to those who promote large-scale extractivist practices, who argued that the only valid demarcations of protected indigenous lands were those made until October of 1988.
The communities won an important victory at the Supreme Court, as it ruled to protect the rights of communities that are in danger of being evicted from their lands.
This ruling was possible thanks to the demands of the Zokling people, who asked the Supreme Court to suspend all legal proceedings that could lead to evictions or the taking of indigenous lands, strategies that are promoted by the far-right government.
Minister Edson Fachin suspended the appeals of government lawyers and determined that the National Indigenous Foundation stop promoting revisals of the administrative processes that fell under the previous law.
237 legal proceedings for the demarcation of indigenous lands are awaiting approval by decree of President Jair Bolsonaro. For those cases, Minister Fachin changed the declaration used to delimit protected lands, an essential instrument that guarantees the right of indigenous people to their ancestral lands. Amidst the pandemic, 300 communities are organizing to block any possible invasion.
It's sad to live in a country where we have to concern ourselves with a pandemic that can greatly affect our communities, with possible infections and deaths being much more likely than elsewhere. And at the same time, we have to worry about the government that is doing nothing to protect us.
The Supreme Court stopped a measure that could have legalized invasions and violence against indigenous people, a partial victory for Brazil's original people.
And the pandemic will make a bad economic situation even worse for women, indigenous people, migrants, and people of African descent in Latin America, a region already plagued by deep-rooted inequality. This is according to a United Nations agency report issued on Tuesday. Unequal access to drinking water, sanitation, healthcare, and housing could also mean higher rates of infection and deaths among those high-risk population. This is according to the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. Latin America has more than 369,000 cases of COVID-19 and more than 20,000 deaths. The region's economies are set to contract by a record 5.3% in 2020, unleashing the worst social and economic crisis in decades. We're taking one last break. Stay with us. Thank you for joining us again. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi unveiled a $270 billion stimulus package for workers and small businesses as the country grapples with the impact of the coronavirus.
If we combine this new package with it, it is about 20 lakh crore rupees, which is about 10% of India's GDP. But we can let our lives revolve only around Corona. We will wear masks, maintain 2 square feet distance, but we will not let go of our goals.
In the United States, the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, Anthony Fauci, warned Congress that a premature lifting of the lockdown could lead to further outbreaks of COVID-19, which has already killed 80,000 U.S. citizens and affected the economy. Fauci told the Senate panel that the pandemic is not yet under control in many parts of the nation. He urged states to follow health experts' recommendations and wait for positive signs that the disease is under control, including a declining number of new infections before ending lockdowns. For his part, President Donald Trump has been encouraging states to end the weeks-long shuttering of major businesses.
I've never made myself out to be the end-all and only voice in this. I'm a scientist, a physician, and a public health official. I give advice according to the best scientific evidence. There are a number of other people who come into that and give advice that are more related to the things that you spoke about the need to get the country back open again and economically. I don't give advice about economic things. I don't give advice about anything other than public health.
Deaths from the COVID-19 pandemic in Italy reached 172 on Tuesday, compared to 179 the day before, according to the Civil Protection Agency. However, the rise in new cases was partly due to late reporting by the hard-hit Lombardy region, which said it had found 419 infections from previous weeks that it had not logged. The total death toll in Italy since the outbreak came to light on February 21st now stands at over 30,000, the third highest in the world, after those of the United States and Britain. The number of confirmed cases amounts to over 220,000, the fifth highest global tally. The Northern Ireland executive has published its 5-stage plan for slowly easing the coronavirus lockdown. First Minister Arlene Foster says that the nation will chart its own course while working closely with both the UK and Ireland.
Our decisions must be based on what is happening here, taking account of our particular circumstances within the four nations approach. Differences and nuances between the jurisdictions in the United Kingdom will emerge. The four nations discussions will, however, continue, and to that end we welcome the announcement by the Prime Minister on the establishment of a new joint biosecurity centre to monitor the levels of infection and identify specific actions in regions where spikes occur.
The World Health Organization said on Tuesday that some treatments appear to be limiting the severity or length of COVID-19 and that it was focusing on learning more about 4 or 5 of the most promising ones. The WHO is leading a global initiative to develop safe and effective vaccines, tests and drugs to prevent, diagnose and treat COVID-19, as the respiratory illness has infected 4.19 million people around the world. But there is a note of caution around expectations for a vaccine, since coronaviruses are very tricky viruses that are difficult to produce vaccines against. More than 100 potential COVID-19 vaccines are being developed, including several in clinical trials. The WHO said in April a vaccine would take at least 12 months. And with that, we end our news brief. But you can find these and more stories by checking our website, telesurenglish.net. And be sure to also follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Until next time.